We're in St. John, New Brunswick, the Canadian city named the most vulnerable to U.S. tariffs. And tonight, more uncertainty here and across Canada after more mixed messaging from the American president.
Well, I may give a lot of countries breaks.
The next round of tariffs expected next week, but Mark Carney hasn't talked to Trump.
I'm available for a call. We're going to talk on our terms.
We asked voters here in St. John,
if you were sitting across the table from Donald Trump, what would you say to him?
Oh, goodness.
How much time do I have?
their colorful answers in the breakdown. The Conservatives promised to cut income tax.
This is a tax cut that will put Canada first.
The day after a similar Liberal pledge, what it means for Canadians who are struggling.
We're all living paycheck to paycheck.
And the Bay's fire sale kicks off.
Half the store is already gone.
The suppliers are hit hard by deep discounts.
From CBC News, this is The National with Chief Correspondent Adrian Arsenault in St. John, New Brunswick.
Well, thanks for joining us. We are indeed in a snowy St. John tonight and tomorrow as we travel across the country to hear what you want from this campaign. And in this city, like so many others, a critical concern is tariffs. Well, tonight, Donald Trump is injecting more uncertainty into the timeline, suggesting some countries could be spared on the April 2nd deadline, but some industries hit harder. All this on day 2 of the campaign, where this is one of the issues driving votes. So our team has you covered on all of it. Analysis from Ottawa and on the road with the main party leaders. So why don't we begin with Ashley Burke, who's covering the Liberals, and Mark Carney saying today he still hasn't spoken to Donald Trump.
Mark Carney says Donald Trump might be waiting until after Canada's election to see who's in charge before agreeing to talk. But like all things Trump, it's hard to tell.
I'm available for a call, but, we're going to talk on our terms as a sovereign country, not as what he pretends we are, and on a comprehensive deal.
Trump hasn't spoken to, congratulated, or even mentioned Carney by name since he became prime minister just over a week ago.
Okay.
And now Trump is causing all sorts of confusion about his next blow in his trade war, saying some industries and countries might be spared on April 2nd, but isn't saying who.
Well, I may give a lot of countries breaks, but it's reciprocal, but we might be even nicer than that. You know, we've been very nice to a lot of countries for a long time, but I call it Liberation Day. April 2nd is Liberation Day.
Trump's latest mixed messaging unfolding on day 2 of Canada's election campaign.
Welcome to my home.
Carney in Gander, Newfoundland, meeting with those who welcomed travelers on 9/11, when America came under attack and U.S. airspace closed down. Now, more than 2 decades later, Carney says Trump is straining relations like never before.
Unfortunately, President Trump's actions have put that kinship under greater strain today than at any time in our storied history.
Carney says if Trump does follow through on his tariffs next week, Canada is prepared to act.
We've done a number of things to put us in a strong position.
Carney says the government already announced another $125 billion worth of retaliatory tariffs it can move forward with depending on what Trump does. While the government is in caretaker mode until Canadians head to the polls, it can still manage urgent issues like this with the tools it has, but cannot pass new laws. Ashley Burke, CBC News, Halifax.
Affordability is also in the spotlight this election campaign. The Conservatives now joining the Liberals in promising income tax cuts. Olivia Stefanovich takes a look at the pledges and the questions about how it would all be funded.
Two leaders, two different views of taxes.
That is what income tax is. It is the fine you pay for the crime of working hard.
We have a balanced approach. He has a simple approach.
After the Liberals promised to drop the income tax rate for the lowest bracket by 1 percentage point, the Conservatives laid out their plan for a much larger cut, more than 2 percentage points.
Every single Canadian who pays income tax will pay less.
Under the Conservative plan, the average Canadian would save about $900 a year, double the savings from under the Liberal plan.
Yes, we're focused on affordability. Yes, we want Canadians to have more money in their pockets. That's why we have a middle-class tax cut.
But let me say something. How the hell do you intend to do that?
The answer for either plan isn't entirely clear. The estimated final price tag, almost $6 billion a year for the Liberals' tax cut, and up to $14 billion annually for the Conservatives. Most Canadians would benefit, but the NDP says there's a problem.
Yeah, we need to give a tax break to the middle class, but let's give it just to middle class, not to millionaires. And their plan doesn't distinguish. And that, I think, is a massive problem. I think most Canadians would agree.
This is not a tax cut for the wealthy.
This economist says the proposed move from both parties could pump much-needed oxygen into the economy. But questions remain about what this could mean for the country's deficit and what government programs and services could be slashed to pay for it.
We know that something has to give. We know there have to be cuts. If there are operational efficiencies, they're actually really hard to get, unless you're just doing straight layoffs.
So far, on day 2 of this campaign, the leaders aren't going into specifics. The fine details are expected to be provided when parties release their costed platforms, promised by both the Liberals and the Conservatives.
But Olivia, the leaders have certainly indicated where they plan to find the money. What are they saying?
Well, broadly speaking, Poilievre says he will find savings by cutting government waste, bureaucracy, and foreign aid, and some Trudeau-era programs like the Housing Accelerator. Meanwhile, Carney, he plans to keep those programs, including pharmacare, childcare, and dental care, but he says he'll find money to pay for his income tax cut by reviewing federal spending programs. We'll likely have to wait to see the details later in the campaign, Adrienne.
All right, Olivia Stefanovich in Ottawa. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So that's what two major parties have to offer, but what do Canadians actually want as they struggle with the cost of living? Katie Nicholson brings us that part of the story.
Andrew Pimentel works 40 to 50 hours a week in this Toronto garage, and he's barely scraping by.
I don't want to be paycheck to paycheck, but I rent, and my rent is $5,000 a month because I have 2 kids. I need a bigger house, right? My wife has a good job, but we're still penny pinching. It's just too much.
There's one major thing he wants from the next federal government, whoever leads it.
Bring down the cost of living. Bring it right down. Like, it's crazy.
Housing and rent in Toronto are among the most expensive in the country, but people everywhere are struggling.
We can't take vacations. I can't take time off of work just so that I can afford to live.
It's the same with me. I live in a four-person household, including me, and we're all living paycheck to paycheck.
Same in BC.
Would love to have retired 5-6 years ago, but quite honestly, every time I think about going to retire, everything keeps going up.
And then there's the sticker shock at the checkout.
Groceries, I've probably fallen over looking at steaks and stuff going, don't we have cattle in Alberta and BC? Roast beefs are food is crazy.
The Conservatives and the Liberals are specifically pledging to lower taxes in lower income brackets. Back in his Toronto garage, Andrew Pimentel isn't buying what the parties are selling.
They'll say they'll cut this, cut that, but they'll get it back another way, no matter what. They always do. They promise one thing, oh, here, take this, we'll cut the GST, and then next thing you know, here's a new tax, or, oh, we'll take it from here and charge you on this.
Affordability, not something this mechanic thinks a tax break alone will fix. Katie Nicholson, CBC News, Toronto.
We heard earlier from Ashley, who's covering the Liberal campaign, but let's go now to our reporters tracking the other main party leaders as they fight for your votes.
I'm Kate McKenna covering the Conservatives, and Pierre Poilievre is spending the first 3 days of the campaign in the Greater Toronto area. This is a region that has been key to Liberal success, but the Conservatives want to flip it. There are more than 50 seats here, and Conservatives feel their message resonates incredibly well in the GTA. Housing is expensive. They want to lower the cost. They're also calling for stricter limits on immigration and cracking down on crime. Public polling suggests the Liberals and the Conservatives are neck and neck in Ontario, and the Conservatives say they've been building up their ground game in Toronto for years, meaning you can expect to see lots of Pierre Poilievre in Toronto during the campaign.
I'm Marina von Stackelberg covering the NDP. We're at the launch of a campaign office in Toronto. The New Democrats do not hold a single riding in Canada's largest city, but they have come close. In the last election, they lost the riding of Davenport by less than 100 votes. Now, this is a small gathering here, and that's what we've seen so far in the campaign, including earlier in Montreal. But it's possible that this time around, the NDP are trying a different technique. Singh has 2 full-time staff with him on the bus just for social media. And earlier today, they got footage of him throwing a few punches at a punching bag outdoors. The NDP are fighting for their survival in this election. They'll take that fight next to Hamilton.
I'm Rafi Boudjikanian in Quebec City covering the Bloc Québécois. Yves-François Blanchet is firing back at the Liberals after a French language debate was cancelled because the Liberals refused to pay a $75,000 fee to participate in the event, which would have been hosted by the private network TVA. Blanchet accusing Mark Carney of cowardice and saying he's insulting Quebecers as he looks to cast himself once more as the protector of Quebec culture and heritage. There is still one official French debate in mid-April, coincidentally on Blanchet's birthday. A gift to a politician trying to insert himself into a national conversation centered so far on who is best fit to tackle Donald Trump.
Now, as Rafi mentioned, the leaders will go head-to-head next month in Montreal in both official languages. The French debate is slated for April the 16th at 8 p.m. Eastern, followed by the English debate on April 17th at 7 p.m. Eastern. Both will be broadcast on CBC, wherever you stream. Now, Alberta's premier is defending recent comments she made to a right-wing media outlet and pushing back on claims that she asked the Trump administration to meddle in Canada's election.
Interference is one thing. Asking the U.S. to refrain from is actually the opposite. I do not want to see anyone interfere in our elections.
Earlier this month, Danielle Smith told Breitbart the threat of Trump's tariffs were boosting Liberal support and that she asked the U.S. to pause its levies until after the vote. Canadian officials said today Smith's remarks do not qualify as election interference. Now, Donald Trump says the driving force behind his tariff agenda, well, those are American jobs. Tonight, Hyundai may be giving him some fuel. The South Korean automaker is pledging to build 1 million cars a year in the U.S. But as Nisha Patel explains, some analysts question if the plan will deliver the boom Trump wants.
Okay, we have a beautiful announcement to make.
U.S. President Donald Trump is calling it a win.
Hyundai is announcing a major $5.8 billion investment in American manufacturing.
South Korean automaker Hyundai says it will build a steel plant in Louisiana and will spend about $21 billion U.S. through 2028.
This investment is a clear demonstration that tariffs very strongly work.
As Trump's trade war escalates and companies try to dodge tariffs, Hyundai is the latest firm to say it will shift more production to the U.S. Taiwan Semiconductor, NVIDIA, Apple, and SoftBank are all promising to spend hundreds of billions of dollars to boost American manufacturing and create American jobs, though some experts say it's largely PR.
Maybe it's investment they were already going to do anyway. Maybe they claim they're shifting the investment from another country back to the U.S., that kind of thing. I expect that to be a regular feature of the Trump presidency.
Though companies can make splashy pledges, they don't always deliver. During Trump's first term, electronics giant Foxconn announced a $10 billion factory in Wisconsin. It was supposed to create 13,000 jobs, but Foxconn has since abandoned most of its plans.
It's fair to say that not every investment that is promised is actually going to materialize, and not every policy is going to yield fruit.
Meanwhile, all those new business plans may not be able to offset the drag that tariff uncertainty is having on the American economy.
His constant stream of jump scares and pullbacks are causing a chill for investment.
Some economists say if trade uncertainty settles down, business investment could quickly rebound. But if tariffs continue throughout Trump's term, it will likely push Canada and the U.S. into recession. Nisha Patel, CBC News, Toronto.
Canadians took their anger at the Trump administration directly to the United States Embassy in Ottawa today and its consulates in 7 other cities. In Toronto, about 100 people gathered outside the consulate. The group True North called the protests a coordinated response to the actions of the Trump government. In addition to tariffs, Trump has repeatedly threatened to make Canada the 51st state. Rallies were also held in Halifax and Vancouver. Now there's blowback tonight to a planned trip to another place Trump has suggested to annex. A U.S. delegation is set to visit Greenland this week, and as Paul Hunter shows us, it doesn't appear they will get a warm welcome.
Among the most remote places on Earth, in Greenland, that giant, mostly frozen island and neighbor to Canada's north, they now wonder ever more, what is Donald Trump truly up to?
They're calling us, we're not calling them. And we were invited over there.
Just a friendly visit, says the U.S. president, about a top-level trip to Greenland this week by senior U.S. officials, including Trump's national security advisor Mike Waltz and Usha Vance, wife of Trump's vice president J.D. Vance.
Hello. I'm so excited to share that I'll be visiting Kalaalleq, Greenland, next weekend.
All set, she posted, to see a dog sled race and to learn about Greenland's culture.
And to express hope that our relationship will only grow stronger in the coming years.
The whole thing has Greenland on edge, with Trump regularly suggesting he wants to annex all of it, and Greenland's outgoing prime minister slamming the U.S. visit as a highly aggressive provocation. Says Trump,
and I think Greenland's going to be something that maybe is in our future. I think it's important. It's important from the standpoint of international security.
Trump has often cited security as driving his interest, with Greenland buffering Russia, likely to its presumed underground mineral wealth. But Trump's suggestions have sparked anti-U.S. demonstrations and a singular, blunt message: Greenland is not for sale. Sound familiar? As countless Canadians push back against Trump's suggestion it become the 51st state, Greenlanders, long aware of Trump's interest in them, are now confronted by this visit and that fraught question: does this mean Trump's serious about Greenland? Paul Hunter, CBC News, Washington.
Here in St. John, Donald Trump's trade war is looming large, the consequences already hitting hard.
So once the tariffs went into place, the price of aluminum jumped by about 15%.
What makes this community uniquely vulnerable? Coming up. Plus, Canada's oldest company has started liquidating its stores.
Everything in the store has already been torn apart, so today is the first official day of the liquidation, but half the store is already gone.
What does the future hold for the Bay and its employees? And later, a wish comes true for an Ontario woman fighting cancer.
I feel very lucky and fortunate, you know?
How she got to meet the cast of her favorite hit show. We're back in 2. The popular DNA testing firm 23andMe has filed for bankruptcy protection, sparking concerns tonight about what will happen to the personal data of more than 15 million users. The company was formed in 2006 and at one point was valued at $6 billion, but it struggled to generate consistent revenue. Canada's oldest retailer, Hudson's Bay, has begun to liquidate all but 6 of its stores across the country. While shoppers cash in on deep discounts, the price for workers could be very high. Ali Chiasson shows us why.
Everything in the store has already been torn apart, so today is the first official day of the liquidation, but half the store is already gone.
The Bay's last days likely are here. The liquidation sale kicked off at most stores.
I bought a couple, like a blazer and some pants and a couple shirts.
Bargain hunters are hoping to get their hands on the coveted Bay-branded gear while they still can.
A lot of the stuff that I was looking for isn't there anymore, so yeah, like the blankets, I was looking for a good deal on a bra, they're all gone.
They're good. It's 50%, 60%, so that's not bad.
And that's just the beginning. As the merchandise dwindles, they ratchet up the sales.
The liquidator will increase discounts as the sale goes on, when sizing becomes an issue, when selection becomes an issue.
The Bay is set to close nearly all of its 80 stores as it tries to crawl out from a deep debt. For now, just 6 locations will remain. Most of the 9,300 employees face layoffs. Also caught up in the liquidation, brand owners. Some can't afford to let their products go at such deep discounts.
We just can't stomach it.
Olivia Globrazon pulled her merchandise from the Toronto area Oakville store slated to close.
A brand producing overseas, you know, they have a great margin. Maybe their cost of goods sold is 20% of their sales price. So they have a lot more wiggle room to discount, whereas we don't.
She had a feeling the end was near after the last couple of Black Fridays were dead.
When I went to the rest of the mall, it was like the mall was packed and the bay was quiet. We were really happy to be in when there was people in there.
When there was people in there. Key phrase there.
Key phrase, yes.
Many bay shelves will soon be empty and stores vacated June 30th. Ali Chiasson, CBC News, Toronto.
Members of Canada's Muslim community are expressing their anger tonight following a weekend attack on a woman east of Toronto. Police say she was confronted in an Ajax library by another woman who tried to set her hijab on fire. The National Council of Canadian Muslims read a statement on the victim's behalf today.
The fear that an incident like this could happen to my daughters keeps me awake at night and shakes my confidence in the safety of our community spaces.
A 25-year-old woman has been arrested. Police have not ruled out hate crime charges. As the Canadian election campaign kicks off, we're here in St. John, New Brunswick, a community threatened by U.S. tariffs like no other in this country.
I don't want to try to fix our relationship with the U.S. I feel that's broken.
Kayla Hounsell breaks down what's at stake in this federal election. Plus, we passed out the national envelope with a question for voters.
If you were sitting across the table from Donald Trump right now, what would you say to him?
The answer's coming up. And where does the race stand as the candidates hit the ground running? We'll take a look at what the polling says. The National breaks down the story shaping our world. Next.
Nobody was texting war plans, and that's all I have to say about that. Thank you.
So that is U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth denying that he was texting detailed plans for a strike on Houthi rebels in Yemen last month on a group chat. Inadvertently included in that chat a journalist from The Atlantic who reports the messages included specific weapons, timing, and targets. The White House says the text chain appears to be authentic. Democratic lawmakers say this is a breach of national security and are calling for an investigation. Now, the United Nations says it is scaling back operations in Gaza tonight. This follows a day of deadly Israeli strikes, including, as Sasha Petrusik shows us, one on a hospital.
As an Israeli airstrike hit Nasser Hospital in southern Gaza Sunday night, shouts of air raid and a hospital wing on fire. Inside the disabled emergency ward, medics and patients scrambled.
This is unbelievable, and it's against international laws.
Among at least 5 Palestinians killed, say medics, was a 16-year-old boy and a senior Hamas finance official, Ismail Baroum. The hospital says he was there for treatment. Israel disputes that.
He was struck while hiding in Nasser Hospital, once again exposing Hamas's use of human shields.
More attacks Monday on houses and trucks, even on a Red Cross building, which Israel later called a mistake. Rising danger to aid organizations, including attacks that killed 6 UN workers last week, has forced the United Nations to scale back.
The Secretary General has taken the difficult decision to reduce the United Nations footprint in Gaza, even as humanitarian needs soar.
The European Union is pushing for a return to negotiation.
The breakdown of ceasefire has caused appalling loss of life.
Israel says it too prefers negotiation, but only if it guarantees Hamas is eliminated.
But if that is not possible, we have no choice but continuing our military efforts.
So the red alerts continue on the border as rockets fired from Gaza are intercepted over Israel. Sasha Petrusek, CBC News, Toronto.
Now, let's break down the issues driving Canadians to the polls. Right across this country, Canadians are making up their minds, deciding how to vote in this federal election.
Solidarity and the sovereignty of Canada is crucial.
And as you do that, we are crossing the country in search of conversation, not about who you will choose, but why, your priorities, your fears, your hopes for the years to come.
I wish for the young folks, for more opportunities for the young people.
Tonight, we begin in St. John, New Brunswick, perched on the Bay of Fundy, where Donald Trump's tariff threats are weighing heavily. That is because this port city is uniquely vulnerable to them. Kayla Hounslow breaks down why and how people here are dealing with the uncertainty of this trade war.
You don't have to look very hard to see that St. John, New Brunswick is a manufacturing hub, an energy hub, and an export hub. Known as the port city and the oldest incorporated city in Canada, St. John sends 96.3% of its exports to the U.S., and that's given it a new title, most tariff-vulnerable in Canada. Population roughly 78,000, it's an hour's drive to the U.S. border. It's also home to the largest oil refinery in the country, a pulp and paper mill, an aquaculture corporation.
Well, welcome to our brew house. This is where the magic happens.
And the largest and oldest independent brewery in Canada. Started in 1867, it's as old as Canada itself, employing 300 people nationwide.
How much time do you spend thinking about these tariffs these days?
More than I would like. More than I would like.
Moosehead Breweries exports 20% of its beer to the U.S., but an even bigger concern is the U.S. tariffs and Canadian counter-tariffs on aluminum.
So once the tariffs went into place, the price of aluminum jumped by about 15%.
The company buys 100 million aluminum cans a year.
A lot of the aluminum that goes in those cans comes from Canada, but the material that the cans are made out of, what they call the aluminum roll, mostly comes from the U.S. So we get caught up either way. And then, of course, if we send a finished can back to the U.S., we get tariffed again.
What did you think when you saw that headline that said St. John is the most vulnerable city in the country?
Well, it certainly got my attention. And as I thought about it some more, it started to make sense.
Here's why it makes sense. Using new local data from Statistics Canada covering the country's 41 largest cities, the Canadian Chamber of Commerce developed a U.S. Tariff Exposure Index. On the index, cities in the top right corner are tariff hotspots. They have a high export intensity, meaning they export more to the U.S. as a share of their local GDP, and they're more dependent on the U.S. as a key export destination. St. John is far ahead of Calgary in second place. But what do both of those cities have in common? Oil.
This is an energy hub, and energy is a really big part of Atlantic Canadian exports, and certainly a lot of those are destined for the United States.
According to the Chamber of Commerce, the Irving Oil Refinery alone can process more than 320,000 barrels of crude daily, with more than 80% of that exported south of the border.
We're so integrated with the New England states. I think there's a lot more to the analysis than just saying, are we the most exposed? Because there aren't necessarily readily available alternatives for all these energy products.
The Canadian Chamber of Commerce says it examined the most tariff-vulnerable cities in the country to provide evidence and analysis for communities, businesses, and policymakers, hoping to inform discussions about how Canada can best respond to the significant challenge posed by U.S. tariffs.
Hi, Kayla, Donna.
To better understand how the city of St. John is responding, we're visiting the mayor.
You've been busy. I have been busy.
How are things?
Well, it's interesting times, as they say.
Here's the thing about Donna Reardon. She likes being in the background, getting things done. it hasn't exactly gone that way.
This is The Daily Show.
A comment she made on CBC News landed her on American late-night television.
Donna Reardon, the mayor of St. John in New Brunswick, maybe you have a good analogy.
I mean, we've been in this comfortable relationship with our American cousins, and now we're being attacked. So, you know, we're breaking up with the U.S., and it's time to move on.
Yeah, we're cousins, but we're breaking up.
Well, that was funny.
She's a good sport about the comedy, but she's had it with President Donald Trump.
I don't think we want to try to fix it. I don't want to try to fix our relationship with the U.S. I feel that's broken.
How much of all of this is informing how you will think about a federal election?
Oh, big time.
What are you watching for?
I'm watching for strategies. I'm watching for leadership. I want to know that, that there is a concrete vision.
And she says her city can be part of the solution, specifically the Port of St. John.
If Canadian exporters should be so compelled, we have a wonderful opportunity to get your product to North Europe or the Mediterranean, for example.
These containers are filled with everything from frozen fish and French fries to clothing and furniture.
All of this potash has taken a 5-day rail journey from Saskatchewan.
Potash is a key component in fertilizer. The Port of St. John ships 1.2 million tons of it a year to markets in Europe, Brazil, West Africa, and Southeast Asia.
We think it's a wonderful example of, kind of an Eastern Atlantic Canadian port helping service an industry in central Canada, getting it to global markets.
And he says the port has capacity to ship even more. Back at the brewery, they're also trying to stay positive. They've created the Presidential Pack, a crate of 1,461 beers.
Enough to get you through a full U.S. presidential administration.
But Olin says the impact to his business is no joke. He's also chair of the Canadian Manufacturers and Exporters Board of Directors and recently spent some time on Capitol Hill.
What was the tone of those conversations?
I think it was very respectful. I think it was broadly empathetic to our situation.
But empathy won't save jobs or protect industries, leaving those in this most vulnerable city still wondering what comes next as the trade war rages on.
As this city braces for what could happen next, we went to the St. John City Market and asked people if they'd answer some questions. Well, one question in particular, and that question was tucked within the national envelope.
Hi, I'm with CBC, and I was wondering if you'd be willing to answer the question in this envelope.
If you were sitting across the table from Donald Trump right now, what would you say to him?
Oh, goodness. What wouldn't I say to him?
I plead the fifth. I don't know. That's a bit of a loaded question right there.
It wouldn't be nice.
We're not a fan.
Probably not something that could go on CBC, actually. I would tell him that Canada's not for sale and we're not going anywhere, so back off.
I would say that he's way too hard on Canadians right now and he needs to chill.
My message to Donald Trump is, are you nuts? You are demonstrating every day of every week that your signature means nothing, your word means nothing, the words that come out of your mouth are not factual or correct. Ration, logic, and reason don't apply in your world. Why would anyone enter into any agreement while you're at the helm?
How much time do I have? What I would say to him is, it is inherently unhealthy for the trade relationships between our two countries to deliberately and full intent antagonize your northern neighbor. I want you to reconsider the tariff war and try, if you can, to establish trust between our two great nations.
It's harder to live as it is right now with the prices going up. It's even worse with the new tariffs.
It's awfully unexpected for how the first month in office has gone. And hopefully we can get back to being partners and not adversaries. Because I think there's a lot of value between Canada and the US's relationship.
I don't think he's somebody who you can have a logical conversation with. So I think he's somebody you work around. I think he's a force of nature that we need to figure out how to deal with.
It's just common sense tells you, why are people listening to this gentleman? I just really am lost for words how to describe him.
I would say, Donald, do you actually believe what you're saying? Hands off Canada. We're not the 51st state. We are the Dominion of Canada. We are separate from you. I admire the ideals of America, but you are not it.
Coming up, with the campaign now underway, where do the polls stand? How much might they change? We'll break down the state of the race next. The National will be back from St. John, New Brunswick, right after the break. On the first full day of campaigning, the major party leaders were on the trail, making stops both symbolic and strategic, pitching promises from the Greater Toronto Area to Gander, Newfoundland. We're on the road too tonight in St. John, New Brunswick. So after day one, what can the early polling numbers tell us? Eric Grenier is the man behind the CBC News poll tracker. Philippe Fournier is a poll analyst with 338. You both co-host the Numbers podcast, and both of you gentlemen specialize in, I suppose, assessing a whole range of polls, not just one or two, so clearly I know you have thoughts. Eric, the election is on. We know it's going to be a close race, but what's the story that you see in the numbers?
Well, right now we are seeing that it is the close race that you mentioned in those national numbers. Now, as we saw in the last two election campaigns, a close race between the Liberals and the Conservatives can still produce a Liberal minority government, maybe even a majority government with the numbers we're looking at. But one of the things that I'm really going to be curious to see over the next little while is some of the numbers we've been seeing for the leaders of the parties. Mark Carney's own personal approval ratings, his favorability ratings, depending on how the pollsters ask it, are quite positive. There are more Canadians who either have a good opinion or a positive view of him than a negative one. And we've seen that Pierre Poilievre's numbers have gotten quite a bit worse over the last little while. Particularly his negatives have gone up, while Jagmeet Singh of the NDP is in a much worse position on the personal front than he was in 2021. And I think just on some of the polls we've seen, based on the leadership qualities and what Canadians are looking for, at this stage, very, very favorable to Mark Carney.
Okay, we're talking about individuals, but not individual polls. I know, Philippe, you both, you know, as we've explained to people, we both collate polls, you assess them. Is there a trend that you see that Eric didn't mention?
Well, Eric mentioned the leaders, and I think it is an important indicator beyond what we see in the voting intentions. Just the polls that we had in the last few hours today showed that the Liberals perhaps have not hit their ceilings. And the numbers are even more improved when you look at the favorability, as Eric has said, but also the preferred choice of Prime Minister. This is a question that Pierre Poilievre used to dominate Justin Trudeau until Justin Trudeau finally resigned. But when we look at the numbers now, who would be your choice for Prime Minister? Mr. Carney leads in every region of the country except Alberta and Saskatchewan. And even in those provinces, Monsieur Poilievre only leads by 4 or 5 points. And so it seems to be a little wave going on, a honeymoon for Monsieur Carney. And the question is whether it will last 5 weeks.
Eric, just thinking, you know, as a voter, do polls matter? I mean, why do people need to check on them? Because they get dumped on so often.
Oh, yes, no, and we hear it all the time. But, I do think that polls do matter in the sense that they are important sources of information. We have to remember that polls they don't exist in a vacuum. They're a reflection of public opinion. They're actually a reflection of just what Canadians think. And I think that it's always important to know what Canadians think about any issue, be it Donald Trump, tariffs, or who they're going to vote in the next election. Now, do people need to follow the polls as closely as Philippe and I do? No, but they can just come to us and we'll tell them what the latest numbers are showing. But I do think there is a value there for voters to have a beat on actually what is happening in the course of the campaign.
So we are, as you know, we're here in St. John, New Brunswick tonight, in part because of its huge vulnerability to tariffs. So there's lots of Trump talk here. What is your sense, Philippe, of how dominant the question about which leader can best handle Trump will be?
Well, we have fresh numbers on this, and we see the question, what is the most important issue facing Canada right now? And again, from the Angus Reid Institute, but we have seen similar numbers from other pollsters. Number one is still cost of living and inflation, but not far behind. We see number in second place dealing with the American administration. And in the numbers, the regional numbers, we see that in Atlantic Canada, dealing with Trump is number two, a very high number two on the issues aside from cost of living. And so, again, I go back to the leaders. In Atlantic Canada, Mr. Carney has a 40-point lead as preferred Prime Minister. He has managed to make himself the better options in the eyes of many Canadians, especially in Atlantic Canada, as to deal with Trump and the American administration.
So, Eric, I mean, it's still so early. What are you watching for next?
Well, one of the things that I think is really going to be key in this election, and it doesn't get as much attention, when you have this epic fight between Mark Carney and Pierre Poilievre, is the fate of the NDP. The NDP in our poll tracker has only 11% support. That is very, very low. It's looking like one of the worst performances the NDP would have if those numbers held through Election Day. And whether those numbers are going to hold is going to be something I'm going to be watching, because the Conservatives cannot win an election when the NDP is at 11%. So to look at whether Mark Carney is going to become the Prime Minister or Pierre Poilievre will, one of the numbers to watch will be the score for the NDP. And right now, it's a score that is very good for the Liberals and very bad for the Conservatives.
Very briefly, Philippe, do you want to take a shot at that?
I will just echo what Eric just said. That we had 4 new polls today, and all of them have the NDP in single digits nationally. This is a disaster waiting to happen if Jackmeet Singh and his team don't turn things around. Single digit in BC, single digits in Manitoba and Ontario. That's a lot of seats that are in danger for the NDP.
All right, Eric, Philippe, thanks for your insight. We'll be checking in again very soon.
Thank you.
Thank you, Adrian.
In each community we visit as we travel across the country, we're meeting up with voters to really dig into some of the issues driving their votes. So here's a preview, a little bit of the conversation we're having here in St. John.
Okay, I'm 60 years old. I've been working as a pipe fitter for 37 years and I can't retire. Hope was the dream of Canada, okay? You're here, you're Canadian, we're all Canadians here. Okay.
But Robert, there are ways to fix that don't include capitulating to somebody who's talking about conquering our country.
I'm not talking about him, I'm talking about Canada.
I do feel a lot of this country right now is it's divided and angry. And I don't think we can be very constructive with anything if we don't figure out a way to nation build.
We'll bring you more of that conversation Tuesday night on The National. Coming up, a Canadian fighting cancer takes a shot in the dark.
I just typed out a message to Ben Stiller and said, hey, I have stage 4 cancer. My husband and I love the show.
Sliding into a celebrity's DMs and a whirlwind trip to Hollywood. That's next in our moment. Hey, talk about star power. That's actress Patricia Arquette on the left, executive producer and director Ben Stiller on the right, both part of the hit show Severance. But the couple in the middle, that is Emily Powell-Heaton, who is fighting cancer, and her husband William. They're both of Markham, Ontario, mixing it up with the stars after an unlikely online exchange. Their taste of Tinseltown. That's our moment.
I feel very lucky and fortunate, I really love the show Severance, and 3.5 weeks ago I hopped onto X. I just typed out a message to Ben Stiller and said, hey, I have stage 4 cancer, my husband and I love the show, and I was wondering if I could meet you or the casting crew kind of thing. I could have a year left, I could have 5 years left. We don't really know with metastatic cancers. And then it blew up. It got up to 5 million views pretty quickly. And then he responded and said, send me a DM. And he very nicely invited me and my husband to a screening in LA. Here we are at Haley Fest. We went to the festival there. We just said hi and introduced ourselves and, gave him a big hug and said thank you so much. And we chatted a little bit there. So that was really cool. And afterwards, I realized Ben Stiller, he had cancer for a little bit. So that definitely was a connection there. It was a wonderful experience. And I'm very thankful to Ben Stiller and the team for putting it all together.
So glad she got to do that. And right now, she's on a cruise in the Gulf of Mexico, as she should be. Thank you for being with us. We'll be back here again from St. John, New Brunswick tomorrow night. I'm Adrienne Arsenault. Take care.